I'm Milt Katskee. I'm the oldest of the three brothers, although generally, if somebody asks, he's the oldest, and he's the middle brother, and then I'm the youngest. I get away with that because he has an old look and he has a lot of gray hair. I was born 5/1941 at St. Joseph's Hospital in Omaha.
My name is Mel Katskee, and I'm the middle child, and I've always been in the middle. And I was born on November 1945, also at St. Joseph's Hospital in Omaha, Nebraska.
Jerry Katskee, born June 26, 1950, at Clarkson Hospital in Omaha.
I want to hear about your parents,
Okay.
your dad and your mom.
Well, my dad, of course, is Dave, or was Dave. My mother, Mabel. My dad and mother were both born in Omaha, and my dad grew up not far from where we lived later on. He grew up on Hamilton Street at about 28th and Hamilton. My mother grew up in South Omaha, where Joe Tess's is now. Used to be McEwen Rest Home, and prior to McEwen Rest Home, it was residential. And my mother was born and raised on a house that would have been on the west side of 24th Street at about 24th and U. And that was kind of an interesting area because the Gorelics, Ben and Yocha, they're Etta Epstein's parents were directly across the street from my grandparents, and the Kaplans were next door to Ben and Yocha, and on that same side of the street were the Martins, and the Martins had a grocery store right on the corner, and that was like an enclave. And as a matter of fact, Yocha and Ben Gorelick were cousins of my grandparents, William and Minnie Rachel Slutskin. And so that's a little bit about that background. My grandfather, who was frequently called by his Yiddish name, Velvel, was a fruit and vegetable peddler. And they had a rather large house. As I say, it was on the west side of 24th. And I used to love to go over there as a little kid because my grandmother had chicken coops in the backyard. And I could go with her and I would help her gravel the chickens, and then I would help her collect the eggs. I noticed the other day in the paper that they're now beginning to raise chickens in places like Chicago, so that you can have chickens in the backyard and then you know the quality of the eggs you got. So I guess to that extent my grandparents were ahead of their time. My mother's family consisted of two brothers and a sister. My dad's family consisted of a brother and a sister. My Aunt Rose was a lifetime employee. That's my dad's sister was a lifetime employee of Brandeis in the children's wear department on the 4th floor. My Uncle Irv went into the military, and he was stationed in Alaska during World War II. And when he got out, he then moved to Chicago, and that's where he got married. And his family was born there. His wife is still alive to this day.
What are their names, Milt?
That was Irvin and Esther Katskee. And my father's father died while my father was in his first year of college. And my father's mother, Sophie, she was a sister of John Robinson of Robinson Iron and Hide and Metal in Norfolk, Nebraska. And she ended up later moving to Chicago, and she worked at Hart Schaffner and Marks, where she was a lapel cutter. She would cut the fronts of suits for Hart Schaffner and Marks. So that's a little bit about the family. I'll give my older brother Mel a chance to talk.
What are your memories, Mel, of that house visiting the grandparents?
Well, by the time I was born in 1945, my grandmother had already passed away. And my grandfather had moved to a house right next door to where we lived in 18th and Paul Street. And then my aunt and uncle lived in another house. There was just 3 houses on that block, and then their grocery store was, that my aunt and uncle had. The Paul Street Market was right there on 19th and Paul Street. I used to visit my grandfather's house, and he was in the middle between my parents and my aunt and uncle. And I used to, I remember banging on a coffee pot while sitting, with a percolator type stove range coffee pot, and just banging it for all it was worth, sitting on the floor there in his kitchen. And that's kind of my memory.
What are your memories of that neighborhood?
Quite a few. There were a lot of, it was a very diverse neighborhood. We went to Kellum School, which was around 22nd or so on Paul Street. And my father had actually gone to Kellum School. We started in the old building, and then when I was about in the 3rd grade, they tore down the old building, and we moved to the new building, which I think is the current building at Kellum School. And but there were people of all backgrounds in that neighborhood. There were Italian families, there were Irish, some Polish, I think, but and some Jewish families, and there were black families. So you had quite a mixture of people in that neighborhood. The places that Jewish people would go to shop for meat, bread, and so forth were on 24th Street, just off of Paul, going toward Charles and in through that area along 24th.
What are your memories of 24th Street?
Well, I would, on Sunday morning, it was kind of, my mother would make my father head off early, up Paul Street to 24th to do the shopping. So I'd go with him, and he was a fast walker, because he walked to work actually, but he could step out. So he had to kind of march along, and then he loved to tell little stories, and along the way he'd tell stories, or he also loved to sing. He had a good tenor voice actually, and he knew all those songs from the 20s, 30s, 40s, because growing up as he did, and so he'd sing If You Wore a Tulip and I Wore a Red, Red Rose, or things like that. And as we were going along up to 24th Street to do the shopping.
Ben, let me interject something, because when Mel's talking about 24th Street, and I remember those walks to 24th Street as well, but that was like a different world, because when you got right to 24th and Hamilton, there was Sam Flack's grocery store was on the corner, and then there was the Rialto dress shop, And those were Jewish merchants that owned those businesses. Then, as you went down the street, there was Forbes Bakery. There at the far end on Clark Street was Adler's Bakery. And in between was what was then City Meats, and that was the glasses, Sadie and Al Glass, and then there was the Schukerts, and then there were the Diamonds.
They were on the opposite
And
side.
they were on the opposite side. And then Finley Ice Company was on one of the corners there, right in the middle, kind of split the two areas up a little bit. And on Sunday morning, in the summertime, everybody that was going to the parks would drive over to Finley Ice and pull their vehicles up, and they would get ice so that they could pack their stuff to go to the various parks, whether it was Elmwood or Peony or any place like that. And those, incidentally, those picnics, that was like a Jewish enclave would meet at one of the parks, and there would be 60, 70 Jewish families all within a little area, all picnicking together. But they didn't picnic as we picnic today.
Oh, it was
Because,
a picnic.
yeah, they would pack all the food that they would normally eat at home, whether it was roasted chicken and roasted potatoes or roasted brisket, and they would take it to the park and they would eat it in the park.
Rib steaks, and potato salad, and watermelon,
Yeah.
and big, they'd use those metal tubs and fill it with the Finley ice and put soda pop and all that, and you'd end up with a huge, it was a meal fit for a king, but it was at the park there, and like my folks and the Gorelics and people like that would all meet there, actually.
Was this before your time, Jerry, or did you?
Some of it, but I can recall going up to 24th Street and walking up and down, going to the different stores there and getting commodities. I can also remember that on Paul Street and about 20th, where there was a store that was Kirschenbaum's store. At one time was a poultry house that had a cheder upstairs, and that's where I first started learning Hebrew from, as I remember, Rabbi Eisenberg, that was at Beth Israel at the time. He was an associate rabbi. We'd go on Sunday mornings as a part of our tour, and we'd stop at that poultry house and pick up whatever poultry that we needed. It's kind of interesting that years later I entered the county attorney's office, and one of the people that I met very early on was a gentleman by the name of Coleman. I don't even remember his first name. He was a black cop that had been on the force for years and years and years. Pinky Knowles, who was the then county attorney, had employed him as a driver for him. And Coleman asked me one of the first days that I walked into the office where my folks came from. When I said that my mother came from South Omaha, he related the story to me that he grew up in South Omaha, and he was actually the Shabbos Goy that would go around to the different homes of the Jewish people that lived there and turn on the equipment and turn it off depending upon what portion of the Sabbath there was. The other thing that was interesting was that Milt mentioned my Uncle Irv, who was in the military. One of the guys I officed near in the county attorney's office was Jim Keenan. Keenan, after a period of time that I was there, asked me one day, he said, "I've always meant to ask you this question, Jerry." He said, "I was in a military unit with a crazy guy by the name of Katskee from Nebraska." He said, and I recall him very well, and he said, he was a guy that drove all of the officers crazy because he demanded kosher rations, and he said he was a character of the first rank and order. So it shows you how small a world when all is said and told.
Jerry, did you end up going to Kellam also?
I did go to Kellam through the fourth grade, and then my parents moved to 600 South 68th Street, and right behind the Elmwood Golf Course there, literally. And I went to Bell Ryan after that for 5th and 6th grade, and then to Lewis and Clark Junior High School.
And that accounts for how he's ended up.
All you guys go to Central.
Yes. We all went to Central.
What were your experiences? I know that one of you was an ROTC guy.
One of us was an ROTC guy. He was as well. But, you know, before we get to that, you know, I think that one of the things we're talking about, our parents and the old neighborhood, and before we started today, we were kind of reminiscing about all the Jewish grocers that were in the area where we lived. And I don't think that we can kind of give an idea of what that is to anybody that didn't live it, but we'll try. As Mel said, we were on 18th and Paul. Our grandfather by that time had moved into the house in between ours and my uncle and aunt. That was Sam and Bertha Schiff. That's my mother's sister and her husband, and he owned the grocery store that was on the corner, 1401 North 19th Street, 19th and Paul. A block to the north was the Nachman grocery store, and in later years, across the street to the west of the Nachman grocery store was a soft serve ice cream palace that was Ben Nachman's invention. I think he had soft serve ice cream there before I remember it being served anyplace else. And I used to walk down and I used to sit in the back and visit with Ben Nachman. On 20th and Clark Street was the Schrago's grocery store. On 20th and Paul was the Kirschenbaum grocery store. And as you worked your way south toward Central High School, the Plotkins were there. The Dandies had a grocery store. So within that area, there were probably, when you started to count, there was probably a good 15 grocery stores that had a Jewish identity. And as a matter of fact, when you're talking about Central High School, when I went to Central, I was a very good friend of Willard Plotkin, and his dad, of course, and his uncle had the grocery store that was about 2 blocks away from Central High School. And we used to sneak out at lunch and go down to Alex's store, and we'd go in the back, and Alex would cut some corned beef. He always had some kosher corned beef in the store. He'd cut some corned beef, he'd put out some rye bread, and we'd eat in the back of the store, and then we'd have to sneak back into school. My career at Central was tied in with a lot of musical things because I was the drum major of the Central High School marching band. I was in the orchestra. I was the student conductor of the band, and I was in the Central High School dance band. And see, there again, my brothers just followed right along. So I'm going to let Mel tell you about his musical experiences, and Jerry can tell you about his.
Well, I also went after Kellam and Technical Junior High to Central High School, and I started the year after Milton left. So there were people that knew the name, and I had to carry answer for all his sins while he was there. And but I was also in the band and in the orchestra at Central High School.
Now tell him what you played.
I played the French horn. Milton had played the trombone, and and I I was also in ROTC and in the ROTC band as well.
And Jerry?
I also, was at Central. I was in the various musical groups. When I decided that I was going to play a musical instrument, I asked for a trumpet. My dad said that there was a perfectly good trombone that was sitting around that wasn't being presently used, and that was the end of that story. So I ended up playing trombone. I was in ROTC. I was in the ROTC band. I was in the various musical groups such as the dance band, the stage band, orchestra, the regular marching band, etc. One interesting story was that the first day or so that I went into Central, I had homeroom. It happened in the library. Miss Blanchard, who had been there for ages, walked up to me when she saw the name, and she asked me if I happened to be any relative of little Davy Katskee. And it took me back for a minute because I didn't remember, hearing my dad as little Davy. But I said, yes, that was my father, and she said that she had him back in her first or second year when she started at Central High School. Remembered him fondly.
Let's go back. Talk a little bit about growing up on 19th and Charles. What are some of your early memories of going to Kellum School, walking back and forth, and so on?
Well, I think Mel adverted earlier to the fact that my dad used to walk, every day. He walked to work, he walked home. There were many of those early years when we didn't own a car. And so we would, I tell the story that we walked back and forth to school and it was uphill both ways. But we didn't have a real long walk. It was a moderate walk to school, but we walked summer and winter. And one of the things that I think has struck me a lot, particularly recently in view of developments, is that we were not afraid to go out and walk and go wherever we felt like going. We would wait on the corner for the streetcar in the early years and then the bus in the later years, and we never had any incidences that were problematic. Today, I don't think kids walk like that to school and walk back, but we were always able to do that. And when I started at Central High School, I frequently would walk to Central High School. And then I did something else that my dad really came down on when he found out about it. I sometimes hitchhiked. I'd go up to 20th Street and hitch a ride with whomever came along. And I would get a ride up to Central High School and then sometimes hitch a ride back. That was kind of the way we were able to move around. But walking was the basic form of transportation for us. I think I was 15 years of age before my dad bought his first car. And I think I drove that car more than he did in the ensuing years. He never got used to that. We have talked about our father. He was employed for 41 years with the United States Army Corps of Engineers, and he was in contract administration. It's kind of interesting that he was scheduled to go into the military service during World War II, but his colonel, who was the head of the 5th Army Corps of Engineers, intervened to keep him out of the service and in Omaha because he felt that my dad's service to the Corps of Engineers in that particular capacity was essential. In later years, my dad worked on the big projects, the Ohi Dam and the other projects along the Missouri River. And he was the guy that would check to make sure that the contractors' request for payments matched up with the work they did, and then he would approve their checks for issuance for payment of the contractors. So I think the remarkable thing is he did that for 41 years. You don't find many people that spend that many years in one avocation today.
And all during that time, he also worked a second job selling shoes, children's shoes primarily. So he'd walk from the one job on Mondays, Thursdays, and so forth to the other, and then get home late, and that would be kind of the way it was.
Tell me a little more about your dad's family, the Katskees.
Well, the Katskees are spread out in various places. Certain have intermarried and left Judaism. There are people that I run into that tell me about a Katskee that they know at the Methodist Church, a Katskee that they met at various other places. I wanted to go back for a minute and talk about my mom for just a second. I do recall that, you know, we didn't have a whole heck of a lot growing up, but my mother insisted that when we walked out of the house that we were dressed in a certain fashion and that there was always plenty of food on the table that was prepared by her, and that was always important to her, to make sure that we gave a good appearance and that we were always well fed.
Well, you asked about other Katskees. My dad had cousins who are, pretty well known in the history of Omaha. Scheffel, who just died, he was a cousin, and Loyal, who has been dead for many years. Loyal was an interesting fellow. Loyal was he was the first dealer of foreign cars in Omaha. It's Loyal's Foreign Autos on 27th and Harney Street. But he and his then wife Virginia, they had the Valois Bar, and they also had Valois Finance Company. And then later Loyal got involved in Western outdoor advertising and precision sign and display, and then still later he started to develop rental properties throughout the city of Omaha. Scheffel, when I first knew of him, was in South Omaha, and he worked at Greenberg's in the Phillips, I should say, because that's the way it was known, Phillips Department Store, and he was in charge of the liquor department. And later he worked, I think, as a liquor salesman on a broader basis. There's a Uncle Hyman who was with the county assessor's office. He was an uncle of my father's, and he was married to a woman by the name of Carrie. His Aunt Carrie had 2 children by a prior marriage. My Uncle Hyman, or my dad's Uncle Hyman, my great uncle, and Carrie didn't have any children together. My dad's aunt Tony, who was Scheffel and Loyal's mother, was something of a legend in the city of Omaha. I think she died at 102 years of age, and she was in the Blumpkin home. And I think, as I recall, when she had her 100th birthday at the Blumpkin home, she was just as sharp as a tack, and she put on her lipstick and she had her hair done and she looked marvelous. I remember at her funeral, which was conducted by Rabbi Bromberg, he made the observation, he said, what can you say about someone who has lived 102 years of age? He said, she's related to half the people in the city of Omaha, and that was true.
I think that the interesting story about her is that she lived on her own up until late 90s. She first lived in a home, and then she decided when the Underwood Towers was built that she was going to go over and see if she could get a place at the Underwood Towers, and she walked in, and it happened that the Omaha Housing Authority person there was John Kavanaugh's mother, and she interviewed Tony about moving in, and after doing so, Tony at about 90 years old, she said to Tony, I'm afraid I'm going to have to put you on a waiting list, and Tony shot right back at her, at my age, you don't put me on any waiting list. And that made the Omaha World Herald as a story of interest.
In earlier days, all of those people would, like if my father's mother came from Chicago to visit, all those people like Tony Katskee, various and sundry other people would all congregate at our house. People would drop in those days. They didn't wait for an invitation. Then there'd be food and drink put out, and people would be talking, and a lot of people still talked in Yiddish, and so they'd all be there, and I have memories of that going on.
I want to know about your grandparents. How did the family, the Katskees, end up in Omaha? And your mother's side also. How did they end up here?
The Katskee family was comprised of 5 brothers. My grandfather Max was one of the 5 brothers. Their dad came to Omaha, and I think his original job was he was the shaman for.
He was the shamus, I think, in one of the synagogues, and he ran the Talmud study session. It was a synagogue on 13th, something.
Yeah, somewhere.
In the early days.
In the early days.
Because I think the Katskees side, Israel and Rachel was the father of and mother of the 5 brothers. Came maybe in the late 1880s, 1890s?
I think it was 1890. I actually have a photograph of them when that I was able to uncover when they first came over, and they came over from what was then Constantinople, Turkey. It's like an old song. It's now Istanbul, but then it was Constantinople, and they had the family originally came from the Odessa, Russia area, and then they fled that area, and they ended up in Constantinople, and then they came to the United States from Constantinople. The picture that I have of the 5 brothers and their parents, and Tony Katskee is in that picture with her first 2 sons, both of whom died as youngsters. They looked like mafiosi figures. They had on they were very slim, and they had on these coats with very slim lapels, but very turned coats at the bottom, and they all looked kind of austere. As I think I've said, I've only knew Hyman of that family, and Abe for just a while. That was Tony's husband, but he had nephritis. He owned a store down in Albright, and what I remember of him was that Tony had to, he was pretty debilitated. She had to help him in and out of bed. She had to care for him just like one would care for a baby, which is remarkable because in spite of all that travail and all that suffering, she's the one that probably outlived everybody else. My mother's family came from a town that my uncle, who just recently died, my mother's brother, tells me was Parchee, Parchee, which was about 5 kilometers southeast of Babrusk, and Babrusk is very close to Minsk in Belarus, and they came. My grandfather on my mother's side, Velvel, he came to the United States kind of as an indentured servant. He got his passage paid by Swift and Company for an agreement that when he came to the United States he would work building cattle pens in South Omaha. That's how he got to Omaha, and that's what he did. He built cattle pens for the first year, and then he wanted to bring my grandmother and my mother's 2 older siblings to the United States, so he continued to work for another year building cattle pens so that he could afford to bring my grandmother and my mother's 2 older siblings to the United States. It was kind of an interesting thing, just as an anecdote. My grandfather wrote to my grandmother while she was still in Babrusk, in the Minsk area, that he had suffered an injury to his hand while he was building cattle pens, and my grandmother, she believed that the letter was understated, that he'd actually lost a limb by reason of an accident, and he just wasn't telling her, so she wrote this letter back to him, and he wanted, and she said, "I don't think you're telling me the full story." He wanted to prove to her that he really did have both hands and both arms, so he had a photograph taken, and he has his one arm up on a pedestal like this, so you can see that one, and the other hand and arm directly in front of him, and I think all of us have a copy of that photograph. He was a handsome man. He was a kind of larger than life. We kind of think of him as being somewhat Falstaffian because he was about 6'2" and a half, 6'3", and in his later years particularly he kept growing this way as well, and he had a hearty laugh and a hearty sense of humor, and as a matter of fact in the United States at the South Omaha Shul he would don the robe and be the reader for the high holidays in the South Omaha Shul.
You mentioned earlier about your grandparents and your grandfather being a peddler. Did he have a horse and buggy at that time?
He had a horse and wagon he started out with, and then later he bought a Dodge truck, and he operated the Dodge truck just like he operated the horse and wagon, because when he wanted to go to the right, he would yell at the truck, and he would yell "ho" or "gee," and that's the way he commanded his truck. He and my mother's brother Abe, my Uncle Abe, worked on that truck together throughout my grandfather's lifetime, and they would get a load at the market, city market, and they would go out and they would peddle in the various neighborhoods, and my Uncle Abe would stand on the running board while my grandfather was driving down the street, and he would yell out what type of vegetables and fruits they had on their load, and then people would come out of their houses and they'd come down to the curb line and they would buy whatever they wanted. It could be a sack of potatoes, a market basket of beans, whatever the case might be, and then they would also, my grandfather would pick up loads and he would go out into the country, places like Weeping Water and Louisville, all kinds of little cities and towns throughout Nebraska and over into Iowa, and he would peddle fruits and vegetables. And they would often stay overnight during the war years and just preceding World War II, when scrap metal became quite a money-making commodity. They would take out a load of fruits and vegetables, but rather than head back, they'd pick up whatever scrap they could in these little communities and bring that back and then sell it to the scrap dealers down on 13th and Izzard and in that area, which again was close to the area where we've talked about where all the Jewish grocers later had their businesses. So they made money wherever they could make money.
And my father's father, Max, he was also a fruit and vegetable peddler by horse and buggy. He contracted pneumonia by being out in that kind of climate and currying the horse and all that stuff, and died in about 1931.
Now, when you guys were growing up, during your high school years, did you hold down jobs anywhere?
Sure, had to, because if we had considered going on and going to college, we were going to have to pay for the majority on our own. I started out, originally I started out in my aunt and uncle's grocery store on 19th and Paul. And then later on, I went to work at Borsheim's, and I sold jewelry at Borsheim's for a period of 4 or 5 years, and then went on to another concern called Abe Seligson and Company, which was Selco. Selco ran the fine jewelry department in Brandeis. Many people will remember when Brandeis was open in the crossroads, right inside the mall entrance, there was a large section of that contained all of the higher-end watches, diamond rings, etc., and I worked there. I also worked for Irv Marcus over at Zales for a period of time, and when I was in Lincoln going to undergraduate school, I transferred into Zales at the store out in the mall, which was on about 60th and O.
My parents were products of the Depression, so they thought it was important that you learn the value of going out and making some money, and holding down a job, and so from well before when most people today would go to work. Had various jobs, work at my uncle's grocery store, had paper out along 16th Street, also worked at Brandeis in the toy department and in the fine gift department, and at Borsheim's before he was there. And when they were on the corner there on 16th and Harney for the Freedmans, and so all the way along from about maybe 7 years of age onward, some kind of job, sometimes more than one job.
I think I started at 6. My Uncle Sam in the Paul Street grocery, he didn't like it when the kids came in after school and they'd have a handful of pennies and their hands would sweat, and then the money was always just all sweaty. And he never liked to handle that, so he hired me to work behind the counter and sell him the penny candy. So I would handle all of this sweaty money that the kids were holding in their hands, and I would help them pick out the candy. I worked there until I was actually age 14, and at 14 I went to work at Nebraska Furniture Mart. My mother had, prior to marriage to my father, had been an employee of Mrs. B, and actually was one of her first employees. She and her cousin, and we talked about the Epstein family, and the Gorelick family was Etta's sister Bernice, my mother's cousin. They both went to work for Mrs. B at about the same time, and they were bookkeepers for her and kept ledgers for her. And so I went and saw Mrs. B, and she gave me a job. So I worked there for the next 6 years, and I did everything in that store. I would carry furniture, I helped deliver, I helped stock furniture. I, in the summertime, would work at the complaint desk and write up the complaints so that the complaint department employees could go out and service customers' complaints. I kind of ran out of gas with that job. I loved it in many ways, but if you worked for the Blumpkin family, it was very demanding. And while I have real fond memories of that, and certainly fond memories of working with Mrs. B and with Louie and with Jerry, I just got to the point where I wanted to try doing something else, and for a while I sold shoes at Brandeis department store, and I did that for about 5 or 6 years. And then I got my first job in a law firm when I went to work as a law clerk. And when I tell my kids this, they think I'm somewhat of a Neanderthal, because my first job in a law firm as a clerk, I made $1 an hour. And I thought that was pretty good.
How did you begin, since you were the senior of the family, what made you go into law?
You know, I don't know, that's a difficult question. I've thought about it on many occasions. I thought for a long time that maybe I would have a career in music. We had a music teacher at Central High School. His name was Noyes Bartholomew, and he was just a great guy. He had played trombone in the Ralph Flanagan Band during the 30s, and he'd gotten a degree from Northwestern University. And he was a remarkable musician. And I was set to graduate, and he asked me what I was thinking about doing, and I told him that I thought maybe I'd try to get a job and work for a while, and then maybe go to college and get a degree in music. And he said, well, what do you think you're going to do with that music? He said, the days of the big bands are gone. There are no big bands out there anymore, and most of the music is guitar music now. And he says, so that somebody with your background and a degree in music is most likely going to end up teaching. And he said, frankly, I don't think you have the patience to be a good teacher. And I thought about that. At first, I felt badly when he said that. And then I got to thinking about it a little more, and then I really came around to his way of thinking. I thought to myself, I would not have the patience to be a good teacher. And so I just kind of gravitated to the law. Anecdotally, years later, when my son was learning to play trumpet, I said to his teacher, Gene Hazen, who was a member of the Omaha Symphony, I said, how can you stand to sit there and listen to people play as poorly as the kids that come in and play? And he told me, he said, I don't listen to the music. He said, I listen to determine if there's any advancement. And I thought, well, if you have to listen to music that way, for sure that wasn't a good profession for me. You know, it struck me when we were talking earlier, and add something in here about my mother's father and mother and my grandfather's work as a fruit and vegetable peddler. There's really a very interesting story about him. At that time, when you did business, a lot of it was on credit because people didn't have money. So you would, you would see grocery stores dealing on credit. The fruit and vegetable peddlers would keep books, and they would charge out, one bag of potatoes, one market basket of peaches, one this, one that, and then they would collect as the people had money. My grandfather was not schooled in the United States, so Velvel kept his ledger in Yiddish, and he would write in there, for instance, the woman with the reite hair, the red hair, and no other designation. I mean, it's just the red-haired woman, or the men with the brachene Fuß, the broken foot. That's the way he would describe them. Now, the foot might have healed, but he was still the man with the broken foot. When my grandfather, Shalom, passed away, and the family went to look at his ledgers, they found that they didn't know who all these people were, had no idea. And there was about, as I recall, $8,000 that was out in credit. And they had virtually written that off. But after the obituary notice appeared in the paper, the family would have a rap on the door, and they'd answer the door, and it would be somebody that he'd sold something to, and they'd say, Velvel was good to us when we didn't have money, we want to pay. And they got about 80% of the monies that he was owed that was collected after his death, just that way.
It was a different time too, because I know that when my parents finally moved from 18th and Paul and sold the house, they looked all over for a key to turn over to the new owners, because most of the time that they were there, they never locked a door. It was an interesting circumstance in that all of the people that lived there were all working class people, but they all stayed to their own things and never coveted anybody else's, and never tried to steal anything, and never tried to enter anybody else's place or do any harm to them.
Okay, Melvin,
Yes.
did your big brother force you into law?
No, he didn't, and
Did he set the example?
he may have to some extent.
Jerry, what about you now?
Well, early on, I mentioned to you, I thought about dentistry, and I thought maybe that's what I would go into. And the more that I got through school, the more I saw that I tended to do better in social sciences rather than physical sciences. And I thought if I wanted to go into a medical-based profession, I was going to have some greater degree of difficulty. So I decided that it was, of the various professions, maybe the best in terms of social science kind of thought and background.
Now, where did all of you go to school? Undergraduate as well as professional school?
I went to Creighton both for undergraduate and as well as law school. And Creighton was good for me. I know, Ben, you were at Creighton in the dental school while I was in the law school, but and for a while when I was in undergraduate school as well. Creighton was good for me because I had a lot of fun in high school, and I got good grades in the courses I liked, and I kind of slipped on the courses that I didn't like, but I never developed the discipline as a student. And when I got to Creighton undergraduate school, at that time most of the professorial staff were all Jesuits. And these guys are imposing guys. I mean, they would come in with their robes and with their belts and sashes, and they were all business. If they told you a paper is due on Friday by 9 o'clock, if you came in at 9:05 with your paper, you'd get an F because it was late. And the classes were in undergraduate school were relatively small, and so the student-teacher ratio was great. And I began to develop good study habits and good discipline. And by the time that I got to law school at Creighton, I was on dean's list throughout all of law school. And even got an appointment, believe it or not, to Alpha Sigma Nu, which is the Jesuit Honor Society. But I thought Creighton really was good for me. I think if I would have gone to a school as an undergraduate where you were one of several hundred, as a lot of the courses that my kids had at the colleges and universities that they went to was the case, that I probably would not have developed that discipline because I'd just been a number in a classroom. So for me it was good, and I enjoyed the Creighton experience, and I was on that campus for 6 years.
Well, I started by my junior and senior year at Central. I started to develop a liking for English literature and for history. And then when I went to Creighton undergraduate school, that kind of carried over, and I liked those areas in particular. And I thought about going into teaching history or something like that, but for some reason, it ended up in the law. I went my first year to Northwestern University Law School. That was at the height of the Vietnam War in 1967, and my first piece of mail when I got to school there in Chicago was reporting to your draft board, and this is your last year. So then I ended up getting into ROTC unit in Lincoln and finishing law school there, and that's pretty much it.
My academic career post-high school started at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. I had decided to get away from home, and that was about as far as I could go and still afford it. I had been accepted at the University of Wisconsin, and I wanted dearly to go there because I liked history, and they had a fine history professorial group. I wasn't able to swing the amount of money, even in those days, that was necessary to go. So I went down to Lincoln. I started down there, and Lincoln at that time, 1968, still had in effect blue laws, and so there was no liquor by the drink, and because of that there were very, very few restaurants, and it was a small town that was trying to break out but couldn't because it had these strictures on it, such as the blue laws. The chant in the stadium, the football stadium, on Saturdays in the student section was all the way to Roca, because Roca was the nearest place that you could go to get liquor by the drink. There was some interesting things about Nebraska in those days that people forget. There was an all-male marching band. I tried out for the band and got in, but I could not take the time that was necessary because you would only get an hour of credit for 5 hours of marching per week. And I had other studies that cut into that. But 160 marching men of the University of Nebraska with one solo twirler, who was Diane Tangeman. And I was down there for the first two national championship teams in 70 and 71. A lot of those guys that were on that team, I when I first went down, I was in Harper Hall, which is on 14th Street, all the way up close to where the Devaney Center is now. And the freshman team was also placed in Harper. And so up and down the hallways were many of the guys that were on the freshman team at that time for the University of Nebraska. I was invited in my second year to enroll in the honors program for the history department, and I subsequently graduated in history with a double major of English with distinction from the undergraduate school. I then started at their law school, ultimately transferred from that law school up to Creighton and finished my law degree at Creighton University.
How long did you spend at the University of Nebraska Law School, Jerry?
A year and a half.
Why did you transfer?
Well, a number of reasons. One, I found that the University of Nebraska had a lot of the class that came out of small towns in Nebraska that aspired to nothing more than to go back to that same small town and set up a practice. Most of the people that were in my law school class were 10 to 12 years older than me. I entered law school at 21, graduating at 24. There were a number of people in my class that were in their 30s that had gone into other professions and changed. I decided that if I wanted to practice in Omaha, that it would be a greater likelihood that I'd have more contacts, et cetera, with the Creighton community and the city, and that's why I changed. I found Creighton to be much more diverse in terms of its student body outside the state of Nebraska, and with people coming from various states in the Midwest and even further than that, and so it was a much more diverse group of individuals.
And Mel, you mentioned having gone to Northwestern.
Yes.
For how long?
I was there 1 year, my first year of law school.
Now, how did the Katskee brothers finance their advanced education?
Well, I mentioned earlier that when I went to Lincoln, I transferred through Zales down to the store down there, and I sold jewelry a couple nights a week. When I first went down, I didn't have a vehicle, and if I wanted to come home, I'd grab the big gray dog and ride from Lincoln back to Omaha. I then got the idea. I called the Goldstein family who ran the car rental agency, and there were people that would take cars from Omaha down to Lincoln and drop them, and they'd have to get them back to Omaha, so I started driving cars and shuttling them back for the Goldsteins from Lincoln into Omaha. That gave me my transportation.
And Melvin?
Well, when I got out of high school, I had an alternate scholarship to the University of Nebraska, but my folks said, you have room and board there. Here, you go to school, your room and board is paid for if you go to Creighton. So I ended up with a scholarship to Creighton Undergraduate School. It was through Exarban. And so my tuition was paid and I had my room and board. But for other expenses that would come up, I worked by that time at Borsheim, so I'd be there evenings, weekends, working there, selling, dressing windows, marking in merchandise and coding it with the wholesale price and the retail under it. The wholesale price was in the code and all that kind of stuff. So that's pretty much how I financed my way.
I already told you that I got a job in a law office, starting out as a law clerk at $1 an hour. By the time I got to my senior year, I was working about 50 hours a week for that law firm, and also going to school. And my wife and I were married after my freshman year in law school. So when I returned as a junior, as I say, I was working about 50 hours a week in the law firm, studying whenever I got a chance. And my wife Judy and I tried to make do off of her paycheck and then save the money that I got so we'd have a little bit of financing behind us. When we got married, it's kind of interesting. I think that we had $400 in cash and a television set with a monitor. I think it was a 9-inch black and white. It was about this big. And in those years, we had one car. We didn't have two cars as most families do today, and it was a beat-up wreck. But Judy started teaching first as for her practice teaching, and then as a teacher in OPS. And so she would come home from work, and typically like a Wednesday evening would go something like this. She'd come home from work, we'd have a quick bite to eat, then we'd put all of the laundry in this old beater car that we had, and we'd drive over to 71st and Blondo, where there was a Koina washing and laundry. And we'd put the clothes, we'd separate them, we'd put them in the washers, plug them all with quarters. Judy would take the car and she'd go across the street to Baker's on 72nd and Seward, and she'd do the grocery shopping, and then she'd come back, and by that time we'd pull the laundry out of the dryers and wrap it up and put them in baskets and then load up the car and go home. In the meantime, while that was going on, I would sit in the corner of the washateria, and I would read my lessons for that night. So that's kind of the way it was. I mean, we didn't have any real money, and we laugh about it now because we had a routine. We'd eat Friday night, we'd have Shabbos dinner with my wife's parents. That was, so it didn't cost us for that meal. And Sunday we'd eat at my folks' house, so it didn't cost us that meal. So we had 2 meals we knew during the week were going to be absolutely free. And so we only had to cover the rest of the week. But it was kind of a struggle, but it you know, looking back on it, it was a lot of fun. We had, our first apartment was a Steinberg Brothers Realty apartment on 72nd and Seward. It still exists today. I hope they've done something to upgrade them in those years. But the places were small. I could stand in the kitchen and I could reach out and I could touch both walls with my arms, and I could turn the other way and touch both walls. And in the winter, when it was snowy and there was a lot of wind blowing, we'd have a furrow of snow going right down the living room of this apartment, where it would just blow in because it was so badly constructed. And we laughed about that even, so you know, we were pretty flexible.
Well, we've gotten you 3 through college. How about the bar mitzvahs? What are your memories of your bar mitzvahs?
Well, my bar mitzvah, I had from then what was the old Beth Israel on 52nd Street. And in order to get to Talmud Torah, I would have to take a bus ride. I'd get the bus at 20th and Paul Street, and I'd go to Cumming Street, and I would transfer on Cumming Street, and I would go out to, it would be right by Benson High School was the bus stop. Then I would take another transfer of a bus from there that would go over to Dodge, would go south to Dodge from Military, and so I would, of course, get out at 52nd and Seward, where Beth Israel was then located. And I had a weekday bar mitzvah because my parents couldn't afford to have a Saturday shindig. I don't think they were used to that in any event, because bat mitzvahs were an unknown at that time. Bar mitzvahs were known, but really up until very close upon the time that I had my bar mitzvah, bar mitzvahs really were a weekday event, generally on a Thursday morning. And so that's what I had, and then we had a little get-together at the house afterwards. I just remember it was a real relief for me to step down and say, I've done it, I am done. And when my daughter, who's the eldest of my two children, had her bat mitzvah, and she just, at that time, just did an absolutely marvelous job. When she got done and stepped off the bima at Beth El, where she had her bat mitzvah, I stood up and clapped for her and cheered, because I knew that that was a real event, what she had to do, because she did a lot more than I did. Now, if you want to know about the guy that was exceptional, here is the exceptional guy right here.
Nothing exceptional.
Tell me about it
I
now.
remember his shindig at home after his bar mitzvah. That was quite nice. I mean, that was nicer than what I had. I had a Saturday morning thing. It ended up being at Bethel, even though we were not members at Bethel. But by that time, there was no bus service to the Beth Israel. Because when we were first growing up, we went to the synagogues near us. Sometimes on Friday evening, we'd go to the B'nai Israel, which was known as the Rosh Hashanah, and then on the High Holy Days, my dad, they used to buy seats, so he had his seat there at the Beis HaMedrash HaGadol, Litvish Shul, and that's where we'd go. But so I started Hebrew school training at what was known as the old Rikus house down on 19th Street, and Mr. Wolfson taught the class there. He, I think, was living in Lincoln at the time, if I recall, and would come in and stay there during the week. And a lot of the students there were sons of people who came after the wartime. There were various children in the neighborhood there, around Paul Street and so forth, that were in that Hebrew school. At one point, Mr. Wolfson, he didn't take kindly to the children misbehaving, and if there was a big ruckus, he'd just go down the row, he'd say, "Watch the pintele," and he'd start giving everybody a patch and punning, So I came home with some red marks, and my folks said, "Well, that's enough of that," So since I couldn't get to the Beth Israel, my dad went up with me, and we talked to Rabbi Kripke, and they had a Hebrew school there, and so then I started there, and that way I could get there by taking the bus there on 20th and Paul, and one transfer, to going up Dodge and then getting back. It was a little easier to maneuver. So finished up there, had a Saturday affair, but really they weren't elaborate affairs like they do now. You had Haftorah that you chanted. You didn't take over the whole service because Rabbi Kripke didn't believe in that. And the affair afterwards was a little cake, a little wine, some whiskey for some of the people that didn't, that liked that, to have a schnapps instead, and then they'd have candy bars and some kind of punch drink for the children. So it was very simple affair. They didn't have bar mitzvah parties as such. I think they were just starting. There were a few kids that would pool together and maybe have something at something like the Birchwood Club or something, but they weren't elaborate affairs either, the people that even had those. The average gift you'd get would be something like a fountain pen or a pair of binoculars or something, and that would be from the wealthy relatives, so it wasn't a huge deal like it is today.
And Jerry?
Well, my parents went back to a Thursday bar mitzvah for me, and it was a result of that guy over there getting married on the Sunday right afterwards, and there was no money left over for any other type of affair. I trained for my bar mitzvah, interestingly enough, with Emil Berkovitz, who was in Omaha on his first stint here at Beth Israel. I think we're one of the only families in town, I'm sure that you can count them on one hand if there are that many, that I was bar mitzvahed by Emil. Emil had my wife in an adult B'nai Mitzvah class. All three of my children were trained by Emil, so the entire family at one time had their bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah training through him, and so we've stayed in touch with him and been very close to him over the years.
Well, we've been reminiscing here for more than an hour, and I think we're probably kind of at the end of the reminiscences, at least for this occasion. And Ben says that he's going to have this made into a DVD, and that it'll be available for my wife and my children and my grandchildren. So I say to all of them, and I'll talk about them for a minute, but I say to my wife Judy, who I've been married to for 44 3/4 years, it'll be 45 and coming up, and she was my sweetheart at Central High School, although at that time I think she says she hated me, but I did some mean things which probably caused that. I did one thing that she has remembered from that day to this. We had a date to the military ball. My wife's father would bring my wife to school at Central, and he had this beat up old pickup truck, and he would leave her off about a block from school so that she would walk along the fence to come into the west side of school. And I had the Central High School marching band, and as she came around the corner where her dad let her off to walk toward Dodge Street, I would get the band marching stride for stride with her, and we'd play music as she walked up that block, and she hated that. But that's a marriage of more years than most marriages last now. We have 2 children. I love my wife dearly. I love my children dearly. My daughter Gail, who is the eldest, is married to David, and they live in Chandler, Arizona. They have 2 daughters, Emily and Molly. Emily is now 11, Molly is 8. And I taught those girls how to fish from the time that they were little tykes. I would take them to the little lakes around their house, or when they came to Omaha, to the lakes around here, I taught them how to fish. I've tried to make them in my own image. I love them dearly. I can't see them enough. Our son Richard, who decided after 40 years and 8 years of marriage that he was going to get busy and have a child. He just had, he and his wife, Rachel, just had their first, and their son, Alexander Philip, is going to be 5 months old in January the 7th. And so I've seen him twice now. I hope to get a chance in the forthcoming years to see him a lot more. My wife and I always said we must have done something right because Judy's a school teacher, and Gail followed in her footsteps. Richard is a lawyer. He followed in my footsteps. And just by the by, I'm extremely proud of both of them. Richard called me a few years back, and he told me he was changing jobs. He had a very, very good job with a law firm in Washington, D.C. And when I say very good, I thought he actually was making an obscene amount of money, but he told me he was leaving that job, and I asked him why, and he said it's payback time. And I said, oh, I'm going to recoup for the years at the University of Michigan and the travel back and forth to Boston while he was at Harvard. And he said, oh, no, it wasn't anything like that. He was going to work as the Assistant Director of Litigation at the Americans United for Separation of Church and State. And so today he's litigating the cases that are coming down through the courts that deal with the teaching of creationism in the public schools, and trying to set the bar at the proper level so that religion isn't taught in the classroom, and I'm extremely proud of that. So this is a person who gave up a very good job to take a much lesser paying job so that he can do something that he thinks is payback. So I love all those kids and those grandkids immensely, and it's been my pleasure to say that.
Well, we've come to the end of our little discussion here, and I wanted to say to Paula, aka Pessel, as she's known most often, that I love her dearly, and she's heard it here.
Well, I have to hearken back to last year when Cindy and I celebrated 30 years of marriage, and we decided to have a little renewal ceremony at Bethel. And at that time, we each said how much we love each other to each other, and we had the entire family there at the time. It was a very, very exciting moment for me. I am immensely proud of the fact that Cindy put in 34 years with the Omaha Public Schools teaching in the area of orthopedically impaired. I'm tremendously proud of my daughters, Rachel, who has a degree in physical therapy, Naomi, who has a degree in photography, and Aaliyah, who is finishing up her degree in massage therapy. All of them have made me immensely proud of their accomplishments. I love them dearly. No grandchildren yet, although Naomi just married, and Naomi and Michael are expecting here in April, so I will be a grandfather for the first time.